There are car stories that sound almost too wild to be true. Stories of machines that were built not just to win, but to completely rewrite the rulebook. At the heart of many of these tales stands one man, Smokey Yunick. He wasn't just a mechanic, not just a tuner, and certainly not just another racer. Smokey was an outlaw engineer. A man who believed that if the rules didn't specifically say you couldn't do something, then it was fair game. And in 1968, Smokey took that mindset and applied it to one of America's most beloved muscle cars, the Chevrolet Camaro. This wasn't just any Camaro. Smokey Yunick had an idea so radical, so shocking, that even GM executives weren't ready for it. He wanted to give Chevy's small block a pair of lungs it had. Never dreamed of HEMI heads, the very same concept that gave Chrysler's legendary HEMI its muscle. This wasn't just about horsepower. This was about pushing technology so far forward, it scared the people who had asked him to build it. The result? A Camaro that could have dominated everything in its path but ended up buried in secrecy, controversy, and whispers of a cover-up. This is the story of the 1968 Smokey Yunick HEMI-Head Camaro, a car too advanced, too dangerous, and too politically charged to ever see the racetrack. Who was Smokey Yunick? To understand this Camaro, you need to understand the man behind it, Henry Smokey Yunick. He wasn't destined for fame in the traditional sense. He grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, riding tractors and fixing broken machines with little more than grit and ingenuity. But World War II changed everything. Smokey became a B-17 flying fortress pilot, flying dangerous missions over Europe. He cheated death in the skies, and that courage or recklessness, depending on who you ask, defined him for the rest of his life. After the war, Smokey settled in Daytona Beach, Florida, the birthplace of stock car racing. There, he opened his legendary shop, Smokey's Best Damn Garage in town. That name wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. Smokey's Garage became the epicenter of innovation in NASCAR and IndyCar. If there was a loophole in the rulebook, Smokey would find it. If there wasn't one, he'd invent it. Some of his tricks became myths, almost folklore among racers. Number 1. Building a Chevy Chevelle that was 7/8 scale to slip through NASCAR's templates. Number 2. Installing a giant fuel line that acted like an extra tank, giving his cars more laps between pit stops. Number 3. Running a car with a 20-gallon fuel tank disguised as a 15-gallon one, and when NASCAR officials drained it, Smokey just fired up the car and drove it away with no gas tank at all, proving them wrong. Smokey's philosophy was simple. If the rulebook doesn't say you can't, that means you can. He wasn't afraid to fight NASCAR officials, GM executives, or anyone who stood in his way. And he wasn't just a trickster, he was a genius. Smokey understood airflow, combustion, and efficiency better than most engineers in Detroit. His engines were reliable, powerful, and decades ahead of their time. By the mid-1960s, Smokey had already established himself as both a hero and a villain in racing circles. To drivers, he was a godsend, giving them faster cars. To officials, he was a nightmare. To GM, he was both a genius asset and a ticking time bomb. And that's when Chevrolet came knocking with a special project. They wanted him to turn their relatively new pony car, the Camaro, into a world beater. But Smokey didn't just want to make it competitive. He wanted to make it legendary. That's when the idea of a HEMI-headed small block Camaro was born. The 1968 Camaro project begins. By the late 1960s, the muscle car wars were in full swing. Ford had the Mustang, Chrysler was cooking up its big block HEMI monsters, and Pontiac was leading GM's muscle charge with the GTO. The Camaro was Chevy's answer to the Mustang, a sleek, aggressive pony car, but it was still finding its footing. Chevrolet knew they needed something bigger, something louder, something that could. Plant the Camaro firmly in the winner's circle. They didn't just want to sell Camaros, they wanted to prove that this car could dominate on the track. And when GM wanted a competitive edge, they turned to one man, Smokey Yunick. Smokey wasn't part of GM's official engineering staff. He wasn't bound by the bureaucracy of Detroit. That's exactly why they trusted him. He was the man you called when you wanted to bend the rules without technically breaking them. Smokey's job wasn't just to build cars. It was to dream up ideas no one else dared to try. So, in 1968, Chevrolet approached him with a challenge. Make the Camaro unbeatable. Now, to most engineers, that would mean tweaking the suspension, shaving weight, maybe squeezing out a few more horsepower from the small block. But Smokey Yunick didn't think like most engineers. He looked at the 302 and 350 cubic inch Chevy small blocks and thought, what if I could make them breathe like a Chrysler HEMI? The spark of an idea. At the time, Chrysler's 426 HEMI was dominating the racing scene. Its hemispherical combustion chambers allowed for better airflow, bigger valves, and more efficient combustion. The downside, it was huge, heavy, and expensive. Chevy's small block, on the other hand, was light, compact, and already a proven performer. Smokey's mind started connecting the dots. What if you combine the lightweight advantage of a Chevy small block with the airflow and breathing power of a Chrysler-style HEMI-Head? The result would be an engine that could rev higher, breathe deeper, and crush anything Ford or Chrysler put on the track. Smokey pitched the idea to Chevrolet. The room went silent. It wasn't in the official playbook, but it wasn't impossible either. This was Smokey Yunick they were dealing with, the man who turned crazy into reality. Against their better judgment, they gave him the green light. Smokey gets to work. Back in his Daytona Beach shop, Smokey started designing what became known as the HEMI-Head Chevy small block. He re-engineered cylinder heads with hemispherical combustion chambers, reshaped the ports for massive airflow, and experimented with valve angles that were unheard of in Chevy engines. It wasn't just about bolting Chrysler heads onto a Chevy block. Smokey was essentially creating an entirely new hybrid beast, Chevy bones with Chrysler lungs. The engine wasn't just powerful, it was terrifying. Early dyno runs suggested it could easily push past 600 horsepower, naturally aspirated, at a time when most factory engines struggled to hit 400. More importantly, it had the potential to sustain that power reliably under racing conditions. Chevrolet engineers who visited Smokey's garage couldn't believe what they were seeing. This wasn't a hot rodder's trick. This was advanced engineering, years ahead of what was. Coming out of Detroit, Smokey didn't stop with the engine either. He started tweaking the Camaro itself, playing with aerodynamics, suspension geometry, and weight distribution. He wasn't just building an engine, he was building a weapon, the Whisper network. Word started spreading through the racing world. Something big was happening in Daytona Beach. Rumors of a HEMI-headed Camaro started floating around garages and racetracks. Most people laughed it off. Chevy with a HEMI? That was blasphemy. But those who knew Smokey knew better. This was no rumor, it was real, and it was about to shake the foundations of racing, the HEMI-Head secret. At the center of Smokey Yunick's 1968 Camaro project was an engine unlike anything Chevrolet had ever seen. This wasn't a simple tuning job nor a minor tweak to the already respected small block V8. No, Smokey was about to rewrite the rules of airflow and combustion. Why the Hemi? To understand why Smokey went for a Hemi-Head, you need to understand what made it so special. In a traditional wedge-style combustion chamber, like Chevy's small blocks, the airflow path is somewhat restricted. Valves are placed side by side at shallow angles, which limits how much air-fuel mixture can flow in and how quickly exhaust gases can escape. The hemispherical combustion chamber changed that, with valves placed opposite each other at steep angles inside a dome-shaped chamber. Airflow became much smoother, bigger valves could be used, and fuel could burn more completely, producing more power and efficiency. Chrysler's 426 HEMI had already proven this by destroying competition on drag strips and NASCAR ovals alike. But the Chrysler HEMI was a massive big block engine, heavy, expensive, and impractical for Chevy's Trans Am style racing. Smokey's genius was in thinking, why not take the lightweight, high-revving Chevy small block and give it the breathing ability of a HEMI? Building the monster, Smokey began machining prototype cylinder heads with hemispherical chambers. He reworked the valve angles so aggressively that the head design looked alien compared to anything GM had ever produced. Larger valves, straighter intake runners, and better exhaust scavenging meant the engine could inhale and exhale like nothing before. To match, Smokey modified pistons, rods, and crankshaft geometry to handle the higher revs and pressures this new airflow allowed. The result was staggering. Horsepower figures north of 600 HP from a naturally aspirated small block. Torque delivery that was broader and flatter than any Chevy engine of its size. Reliability that could withstand long endurance racing, not just drag sprints. This was no garage hack job. It was advanced engineering that rivaled what was happening in Detroit's secret Skunk Works labs. GM's shocked. When Chevrolet executives came to see the progress, they were floored. The numbers Smokey was getting out of his HEMI-headed Camaro didn't just beat Ford's Mustang and Chrysler's 34. It threatened to embarrass GM's own big block programs. Think about it. If a lightweight, small block Camaro with Smokey's HEMI heads could crush the competition, why would anyone bother with GM's expensive big block cars like the Corvette? Smokey had unknowingly created a political problem inside Chevrolet itself, and that wasn't the only issue. Smokey wasn't a corporate yes man. He was blunt, stubborn, and unapologetically rebellious. If GM tried to muzzle him, he'd push back. They wanted a winner, but they also wanted control, and Smokey was never someone you could control. A weapon too dangerous. By 1968, whispers of Smokey's HEMI-headed Camaro were leaking out. Rival teams were nervous. NASCAR officials were wary, and GM was caught in the middle. They had a monster on their hands, a Camaro that could change the face of racing, but it was too advanced, too risky, and too politically explosive. It wasn't just about performance anymore. It was about what this car represented: a rebellion against Detroit's carefully balanced engine hierarchies, a threat to NASCAR's fragile balance of competition, a challenge to the very identity of Chevrolet's performance lineup. Smokey had built something so good, so radical, that GM didn't know whether to unleash it or bury it. The bubble burst when the dream shattered. For Smokey Yunick, the 1968 HEMI-Head Camaro wasn't just another car project, it was a revolution. He had poured months of work into reimagining Chevy's small block. On the dyno, the results spoke louder than words. Horsepower that embarrassed Ford, torque that made Chrysler sweat, and a lightweight package that gave it an edge over everything else in the field. But success in Smokey's garage didn't automatically mean success on the racetrack. Racing, after all, wasn't just about speed. It was about politics, rules, and keeping the manufacturers happy. And in that world, Smokey's creation was a ticking time bomb, testing the limits. When word of the HEMI-Head Camaro's power reached Chevrolet's higher-ups, their reaction wasn't celebration, it was panic. Smokey had effectively built a giant killer, and that created a problem. Chevy's performance ladder was carefully structured. The Camaro was supposed to be a pony car, battling the Mustang. The Corvette was the king of performance, with big block V8s that were meant to stay on. Top Chevy's full-size cars carried the torque-heavy big motors for the drag strip crowd. Smokey's engine blurred all those lines. A small block Camaro that could outgun a Corvette that wasn't just fast, that was heresy. It risked undercutting GM's own flagship models. And then there was NASCAR. Smokey's reputation with officials was already complicated. To them, he was a trickster who played too close to the edge of legality. A HEMI-headed Chevy small block wasn't just bending the rules, it was snapping them in half. NASCAR steps in. When Smokey began whispering about putting his HEMI-Head Camaro on the track, NASCAR wasted no time. They didn't even wait for it to dominate. Instead, they cut it off at the knees. The sanctioning body quickly declared that Smokey's head design didn't fit within the homologation rules. Unless Chevrolet mass-produced thousands of these HEMI-style heads for street cars, the engine would never be legal in competition. And Chevrolet? They weren't about to build a production HEMI Camaro. To NASCAR, the decision was simple. If they let Smokey's engine in, it would upset the delicate balance of competition. Ford would protest, Chrysler would revolt, and the whole sport would descend into chaos. Better to kill the idea quietly than let it become a monster. Chevrolet pulls the plug. GM executives were also growing nervous. They had originally wanted Smokey to give the Camaro a competitive edge, not to create a scandal. Between NASCAR's resistance and internal worries about undermining the Corvette, Chevrolet decided to back away from the project. Smokey's HEMI-headed small block was shelved. The Camaro he had built, the engine that had promised to redefine American performance, was pushed into the shadows. Smokey, of course, was furious. He had done exactly what they asked, built the ultimate Camaro, but instead of racing glory, he was handed silence. GM didn't promote the project, NASCAR didn't allow it, and the car itself faded into legend. The fallout for Smokey Yunick. This wasn't the first time he had clashed with the establishment, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But the 1968 HEMI-Head Camaro left a mark. It was proof that he could out-engineer the entire auto industry from his one-car garage in Daytona. For GM, it was a reminder of how dangerous Smokey's genius could be. He wasn't a corporate man, and he couldn't be controlled. Give him too much freedom, and he'd build something. Even Chevrolet itself wasn't ready for racing fans. It became one of those whispered stories. Did you hear about Smokey's Camaro? The one with the HEMI heads that never raced? It was the kind of tale that blurred the line between myth and reality. Except this time, it wasn't a myth. The car was real. The engine was real. The failure was real. Lessons learned and legacy. The story of Smokey Yunick's 1968 HEMI-Head Camaro is more than just an untold chapter. In muscle car history, it's a reminder of what happens when innovation collides with politics, and when one man's genius is simply too far ahead of its time. Smokey's reputation cemented. Smokey Yunick was already known as NASCAR's most creative outlaw, but the HEMI-Head Camaro took his reputation to another level. To engineers, he was a visionary, someone who could look at a problem from an angle no one else had considered. To racing officials, he was a constant thorn in the side, and to car enthusiasts, he became the archetype of the mad scientist mechanic, the guy who built things in a garage that Detroit's billion-dollar factories couldn't match. The Camaro project only reinforced that image. Smokey didn't just bend rules. He imagined entirely new realities. His HEMI-headed small block proved he could outthink Chrysler's HEMI dominance and outgun Ford's high-revving V8s. Even if the car never raced, the legend of what it could have been became just as powerful. GM's missed opportunity. For Chevrolet and General Motors, the HEMI-Head Camaro became a lesson in fear. On paper, they had the ultimate weapon, a lightweight pony car with a revolutionary engine that could have embarrassed Ford and Chrysler in one blow. But instead of unleashing it, they buried it. Why? Because corporations don't always reward innovation. They protect hierarchies. The Corvette had to remain king. NASCAR politics had to remain balanced. Chrysler couldn't be given grounds for protest. So GM did the safe thing. They shut Smokey down, but by doing so, they missed a chance to make the Camaro not just competitive, but legendary. Imagine if the Camaro had been the first American pony car with a HEMI-headed V8. Imagine if Chevy had mass-produced it, forcing Chrysler to respond and Ford to scramble. The muscle car wars might have looked very different. The legacy in racing. Even though NASCAR never allowed Smokey's HEMI heads, his ideas didn't vanish. Independent engine builders, hot rodders, and aftermarket companies carried the torch. By the 1970s, radical cylinder head designs inspired by Smokey's concepts began popping up in drag racing and road racing. More importantly, Smokey's relentless pursuit of efficiency influenced generations of engineers. His work proved that airflow is everything and that a smaller engine breathing better could outperform a larger one choking on old designs. Today, that philosophy is everywhere in LS engines, in modern HEMIs, even in turbocharged 4 cylinders, dominating racing, a symbol of what could have been. For enthusiasts, the HEMI-Head Camaro is a ghost story, a legend whispered in forums, magazines, and garage conversations. Did you know Smokey Yunick built a HEMI-headed small-block Camaro in '68, and it got banned before it raced? It's the kind of tale that sparks imagination. What if it had been unleashed? What if Smokey had ignored GM and gone rogue? What if NASCAR had let it in? The answers don't matter as much as the myth itself, because in the end, the 1968 HEMI-Head Camaro isn't remembered for what it did. It's remembered for what it almost did. Smokey Yunick once said, "The guy who tries something new is bound to get it wrong a few times, but he's the only one who's gonna move the ball forward." That's exactly what the HEMI-Head Camaro represents. A failed project on paper, but a giant leap for imagination and courage. The Camaro that never was. In the grand story of American muscle, the 1968 Smokey Yunick HEMI-Head Camaro remains an unfinished chapter. It was too powerful for its time, too radical for its creators, and too controversial for the rulebook. But maybe that's why it's still remembered. It wasn't just a car, it was a challenge to the system, a reminder that sometimes the best machines never make it past the garage door. Smokey Yunick didn't build cars to please corporations or officials. He built them to prove what was possible. And in 1968, for one moment, he proved that a Camaro could breathe like a HEMI and scared the world enough that they made sure it never saw the light of day. If you enjoyed this incredible story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more epic automotive adventures. Your support keeps these stories alive.